June Everly pressed her back against the cold wall of her newspaper office and leveled the rifle at the man stepping through her door. Her breath came fast in the frigid air. The lantern on her desk threw his shadow long across the floorboards, and she could see snow melting on his shoulders. He stopped. His hands came up slow. His eyes found hers and held. She had never seen him before tonight, but the stolen land deed in her desk drawer said he was the one they were hunting. A thief. A saboteur. The man who would ruin Blue Gulch if she let him walk away. Her finger hovered near the trigger. He did not move. He did not speak. He just watched her with a steadiness that made her heart hammer harder than it should. June's voice came out steadier than she felt. Lower the coat. Slow. He tilted his head a fraction, then used 2 fingers to peel the heavy wool back from his waist. No gun. No knife she could see. Just a man in work clothes standing in her doorway like he had every right. She tightened her grip on the rifle. Who are you? He let out a long breath through his nose. The name's Levi Cutter. I'm the freight foreman out of Cheyenne. I got a wire today saying someone in Blue Gulch needed a shipment held and rerouted. Figured I'd ride in tonight before the weather turned worse. He paused. Looks like I picked the wrong door. June's pulse did not slow. She had heard the name Cutter. The freight lines ran through his hands. If he controlled the shipments, he controlled half the commerce in the territory. And if he was working with the land company, he could strangle Blue Gulch without firing a shot. Her jaw tightened. You're lying. Nobody wired you. We don't have money for freight holds. His eyes narrowed. I have the wire in my coat pocket. You want to see it, or you want to shoot me first and ask later? She did not lower the rifle. Toss the coat on the floor. He did. Slow and careful. Then he stood there in his shirt sleeves, arms still half raised, waiting. June edged forward and kicked the coat toward the desk, keeping the barrel trained on his chest. She crouched fast, yanked the pocket open, and pulled out a folded yellow paper. The telegram was real. It had her newspaper's name on it. But the signature was not hers. It was signed with her father's name, a name she had not used in 6 years. Her stomach turned cold. Someone had sent this wire in her father's name to draw Levi Cutter into town tonight. And she had just greeted him with a rifle. She looked up. He was watching her with an expression she could not read. His hands had lowered an inch. You going to tell me what's going on? Or do I walk back out that door and let you sort your own mess? June swallowed hard. She could not let him leave. If the land company found out he was here, they would twist it into something worse. And if he was innocent, she had just made an enemy of the one man who might be able to help her. She lowered the rifle. Her hands shook. I'm sorry. I thought you were someone else. Levi's gaze flicked to the desk, then back to her face. Someone else who breaks into newspaper offices after dark. She set the rifle against the wall and straightened. Someone who stole a land deed 3 nights ago and set me up to take the fall for it. His expression shifted. Not by much, but enough. He stepped forward and picked up his coat, shook the snow off, and draped it over the back of a chair. Then he turned and looked at her full on for the first time. You're June Everly. She nodded. He rubbed a hand over his beard. I heard your name when I rode through Laramie last month. They said you took over the Blue Gulch paper after your father left. said you were the only one in town willing to print the truth about the Moonstone Ranch sale. She felt heat rise in her chest. It was not a compliment. It was a warning. The Moonstone Ranch had been sold under pressure to a land company backed by men with enough money to erase a town if it got in their way. She had printed the terms of the sale. She had printed the names. And 2 days later, someone broke into her office and stole the original deed she had been holding as evidence. Then a warrant appeared with her name on it, charging her with theft and fraud. She had been running on borrowed time ever since. Levi's voice dropped. If you're holding stolen papers, you're in more trouble than a rifle can fix. June's chin came up. I didn't steal anything. Someone planted evidence and framed me to shut down the paper. And now there's a warrant out, and the sheriff's bought, and I have maybe 2 days before they haul me out of here in irons. He studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down like he owned the place. Tell me the whole thing. She stared at him. Why would you help me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. He leaned back and crossed his arms. Because whoever sent that wire used your father's name to pull me into this. That means I'm already in it whether I like it or not. And if the land company's dirty enough to frame a newspaper editor, they're dirty enough to go after the freight lines next. So talk. June's throat tightened. She had not told anyone the full story. Not the printer. Not the clerk at the dry goods store. Not even the pastor. She had kept it locked down because trust was a luxury she could not afford. But Levi Cutter sat there waiting, and the look in his eyes said he had seen worse than crooked land deals. She pulled out the other chair and sat. June started with the Moonstone Ranch. The land had been in the Morgan family for 30 years. Good water. Grazing rights. Close enough to Blue Gulch to supply the town, but far enough out to avoid trouble. Then the railroad announced a new spur line, and suddenly the ranch sat on a route worth 10 times what it had been. The land company moved in fast. They made an offer. Then they made threats. Then they made the threats real. Livestock poisoned. Fences cut. The youngest Morgan boy run off the road in his wagon and left with a broken leg. The family sold. But the deed they signed was not the deed that got recorded. The recorded version gave the land company water rights that stretched into town limits. Rights that would let them choke off Blue Gulch's wells if the town did not pay tribute. June had gotten her hands on both deeds. She had been about to print the story when the office was broken into. The original deed vanished, and 2 days later, a warrant appeared accusing her of forging documents and stealing county records. Levi's jaw tightened. Who signed the warrant? A judge in Cheyenne. Same man who approved the rail spur. She watched his face. He did not look surprised. He looked angry. That's Judge Holleran. He's owned by the same men who run the land company. If he signed a warrant, it means they want you gone fast and quiet. June felt the weight of it settle heavier. I know. I've been trying to get word to the territorial marshal, but the telegraph operator's been bought off. Any wire I send gets buried. Levi leaned forward. What about the second deed? The fake one. Do you have a copy? She hesitated. Then she pulled open the desk drawer and took out a folded sheet of paper. She had copied the recorded deed by hand in the county office 3 weeks ago, before anyone knew she was paying attention. She slid it across the table. He unfolded it, scanned the lines, and his mouth pressed into a hard line. This is fraud. Clean and simple. If you can prove the Morgans signed something different, The whole sale collapses. June nodded. That's why they framed me. If I'm arrested, the paper shuts down, the story dies, and they take the town piece by piece. Levy set the paper down and looked at her. So what's your plan? She did not have one. Not a good one. She had been running on fear and stubbornness, printing the paper every week and hoping someone outside Blue Gulch would notice before the warrant caught up to her. But she could not say that out loud. Not to a man she had held at gunpoint 10 minutes ago. She straightened her shoulders. I'm going to keep printing until they drag me out. Or until I find someone who'll listen. Levi's expression did not change. That's not a plan. That's suicide. Her temper flared. Then, what would you do? He stood up, paced to the window, and looked out at the frozen street. The land company's squeezing you because you're alone. They figure you'll fold or run. But if you had an ally with reach, someone who could move goods and money and people without their permission, they'd have to think twice. He turned back. I can hold their freight, reroute shipments, delay supplies until they come to the table. It won't stop them, but it'll slow them down long enough for you to get your story to someone who matters. June stared at him. Why would you risk that? You said it yourself. If they're dirty enough to come after me, they'll come after you. He shrugged. They'll come after me anyway. I've been a thorn in their side for 2 years. This just moves up the timeline. She did not know whether to trust him. He was too calm, too sure. Men like that either kept their word or broke it cleanly, and she had no way to tell which kind he was. But she was out of options. The warrant was real. The threat was real. And she could not fight the land company with a printing press and a borrowed rifle. She stood. If we do this, we do it smart. No heroics. No unnecessary risks. We get the story out, we get the Morgans their justice, and we keep Blue Gulch alive. That's it. He met her eyes. Agreed. Then he held out his hand. She looked at it. His palm was scarred and rough. The hand of a man who worked with his back and his fists, not just his words. She took it. His grip was firm and warm, and something in her chest loosened just a fraction. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was something more dangerous. She let go and stepped back. We start tomorrow. There's a freight auction at the rail yard in the morning. If you're serious about holding their shipments, that's where you do it. Levi nodded. I'll be there. He pulled on his coat, settled his hat, and paused at the door. One more thing. If they come for you tonight, you send word. Don't wait. Don't try to handle it alone. She almost smiled. You don't even know where I live. He gave her a look that was half amused, half serious. Small town. I'll find you. He left. The door swung shut behind him, and June stood alone in the quiet office with the rifle still leaning against the wall and the folded deed still on her desk. She pressed her palms flat on the scarred wood and let out a long breath. She had just allied herself with a man she did not know, based on nothing but a telegram and a handshake. It was reckless. It was desperate. It was the only move she had left. She picked up the deed, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the hidden pocket she had sewn into the lining of her coat. Then, she checked the lock on the door, turned down the lantern, and went upstairs to the small room above the office where she had been sleeping since the break-in. She did not trust her boarding house anymore. She did not trust the hotel. She trusted 4 walls and a loaded rifle within reach. She lay down on the narrow bed, without undressing, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow ticked against the window. Somewhere in Blue Gulch, the land company's men were planning their next move. And somewhere out there, Levi Cutter was walking back to wherever he had left his horse, carrying the knowledge that he had just stepped into a fight that could cost him everything. June closed her eyes. She did not pray. She had stopped praying the day her father told her she was a fool for taking over the paper, that she would lose everything chasing ghosts, and that he wanted nothing more to do with her. She had not spoken to him since. But tonight, alone in the dark, she let herself hope. Just a little. Just enough to get through tomorrow. Morning came cold and sharp. June dressed in the gray light before dawn, pulled on her heavy coat and gloves, and went downstairs. The press sat silent in the corner. She had not run it in 3 days. The type was still set for the next edition, but she had been too afraid to print it. If the sheriff came while the press was running, he could seize the whole operation, and she would lose the only weapon she had. But if Levi Cutter kept his word, she might have time. She might have cover. She checked the deed in her coat lining, locked the door behind her, and walked down the frozen street toward the rail yard. Blue Gulch was barely awake. Smoke rose thin from a few chimneys. A dog barked somewhere behind the general store. The saloon was dark. The church bell had not rung yet. June kept her head down and her hands in her pockets. She passed the dry goods store, the barber shop, the land office with its new painted sign that still smelled of fresh varnish. The rail yard sat at the east edge of town, a flat stretch of hard-packed dirt lined with freight wagons, stacked crates, and a long loading platform. A crowd had already gathered. Farmers, merchants, a few ranch hands, and standing near the platform, in a dark coat and a flat-brimmed hat, Levi Cutter. He saw her. He did not wave. He did not smile. He just gave a small nod and turned his attention back to the auctioneer climbing onto the platform. June moved closer, careful to keep distance between herself and the other townsfolk. She recognized most of them. The blacksmith, the hotel owner, the widow Calhoun, who ran the boarding house. None of them looked at her. They knew about the warrant. They knew she was walking a knife's edge. And they were scared enough of the land company to keep their distance. The auctioneer banged a hammer on the platform rail. Gentlemen, ladies, we've got freight from Cheyenne, Denver, and points east. Bidding starts in 5 minutes. Get your lists ready. June's pulse quickened. This was it. If Levi could control the auction, he could cut off the land company's supply line. But if he pushed too hard, they would know he was working against them. The first lot came up. Farm equipment. A plow, a seed drill, 3 coils of barbed wire. The bidding was quick and quiet. A rancher from outside town took it for $20. The second lot was dry goods. Flour, sugar, bolts of fabric, lamp oil. The hotel owner bid. Then a man June did not recognize stepped forward and raised the bid by $5. She felt her stomach clench. She knew that man. He worked for the land company. His name was Royce, and he had been in Blue Gulch for 3 weeks. Watching, listening, buying up debts, and leaning on anyone who looked weak. Royce bid again. The hotel owner hesitated, then shook his head and stepped back. Royce smiled. The auctioneer lifted his hammer. Going once. Going twice. Levi's voice cut across the yard. $50. Every head turned. The auctioneer blinked. $50 for dry goods was robbery. It was double the lot's value. Royce's smile vanished. He turned and looked at Levi. His eyes narrowed. You bidding or making a point? Levi did not move. I'm bidding. Royce stepped closer. 60. Levi tilted his head. 75. The crowd went silent. The auctioneer looked between them like he was watching a gunfight. Royce's jaw tightened. You don't even need dry goods. You're freight, not retail. Levi shrugged. Maybe I'm diversifying. Royce stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked off the platform without another word. The auctioneer brought the hammer down. Sold to Mr. Cutter for $75. June let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Levi had just burned money to make a point. He had just painted a target on his back. And he had done it in front of half the town. The auction continued. Levi bid on 2 more lots. He won one and let Royce take the other. By the time the last crate was sold, the message was clear. Levi Cutter was not going to let the land company control the freight without a fight. June waited until the crowd dispersed, then walked over to where Levi stood, settling his account with the auctioneer. She kept her voice low. That was reckless. He handed the auctioneer a stack of bills and pocketed the receipt. That was necessary. She glanced over her shoulder. Royce was standing near a wagon on the far side of the yard, talking to 2 other men. All 3 were watching. You just made yourself a target. Levi picked up a crate of flour and carried it toward a freight wagon. I was already a target. Now they know I'm not backing down. He loaded the crate, then turned and looked at her. You got what you needed. Evidence that they're using the freight system to squeeze the town. Print it. She stared at him. If I print it, they'll come after both of us. He met her eyes. They're coming anyway. Might as well make it count. June walked back to the newspaper office with her heart hammering. She had the angle. She had the witness. She had the evidence of the land company using freight control to manipulate prices and starve out competition. If she printed it, she would be putting Levi's name in the paper alongside her own. She would be marking him as an ally. And once that happened, there would be no walking it back. She unlocked the door, went inside, and stood in the middle of the room, staring at the press. Her father's voice echoed in her head. You're a fool, June. You think the truth matters more than survival. You think people care about justice when their bellies are empty and their debts are piling up. You'll lose everything, and no one will thank you for it. She had believed him for a long time. She had believed she was selfish for wanting to run the paper, arrogant for thinking she could make a difference. She had carried that shame like a stone in her chest for 6 years. But standing here now, with the deed in her coat and Levi Cutter's reckless bid still ringing in her ears, she felt something shift. Maybe her father was wrong. Maybe the truth did matter. Maybe survival was not the same thing as surrender. She rolled up her sleeves, pulled out the typecase, and started setting the front page. The headline came first. Local freight foreman breaks land company stranglehold at rail yard auction. Then the story. She wrote it clean and fast. No flourishes, just the facts. Levi Cutter's name, the bid amounts, Royce's retreat, the pattern of price manipulation over the past 3 weeks. She did not name the land company directly. She did not have to. Anyone who read it would know. She printed 20 copies, let the ink dry, and stacked them on the desk. Then she locked the door and went to find Levi. He was at the freight yard office, a small wooden shack near the loading platform. She knocked. He opened the door, saw her face, and stepped aside. She handed him a copy of the paper. He read it standing up, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her. "You just declared war." She nodded. "So did you." He almost smiled. Then he folded the paper and tucked it into his coat. "What's next?" She told him. The Morgans were still in town, staying with family south of Blue Gulch. If she could get them to testify about the deed, she could build a case strong enough to take to the territorial marshal. But the land company knew the Morgans were the weak link. They had been watching the family since the sale. If June rode out to see them, she would be followed. And if the land company figured out what she was doing, the Morgans would disappear before they could talk. Levi leaned against the desk. "So we need a distraction. Something big enough to pull the company's eyes off you while you ride out." June frowned. "Like what?" He thought for a moment. "There's a shipment coming in tomorrow night. Heavy equipment for the rail spur. If I delay it, they'll have to send someone to deal with me. That buys you time." She shook her head. "They'll arrest you." He shrugged. "They'll try. But I know the rail schedules better than they do. I can keep them running in circles for a day, maybe 2. That's all you need." She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him it was too dangerous, that he was risking too much for a town that was not his, and a fight that was not his to win. But the look in his eyes said he had already decided. And maybe part of her was grateful. Maybe part of her needed to believe that someone would stand with her, even when the odds were brutal and the cost was high. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Levi would send a wire to the rail depot in Cheyenne, requesting a shipment delay due to weather damage on the line. It was plausible enough to buy a few hours. Then he would ride out to meet the freight train at a siding 15 miles north, and personally hold the cargo until the land company sent someone to negotiate. While he kept them busy, June would ride south to the Morgan family and get their testimony on record. She would bring a notary from the next town over, someone the land company had not bought yet. If she could get signed affidavits, she could take them straight to the territorial marshal's office in Laramie. It was not a perfect plan. It had a dozen ways to fail, but it was better than waiting for the warrant to catch up with her. They agreed to meet back in Blue Gulch in 2 days. If either of them did not show, the other would assume the worst and move forward alone. June did not like that part. She did not like the idea of Levi disappearing into the snow with no backup and no guarantee. But she did not say it out loud. She just nodded, shook his hand again, and left. That night, she packed a saddlebag with the copied deed, a notebook, a pencil, and enough food for 2 days. She checked the rifle, loaded it, and wrapped it in an oilcloth. Then she sat down at the desk and wrote a letter to the territorial marshal. She laid out the whole story. The Moonstone Ranch sale, the forged deed, the warrant, the land company's freight manipulation, Levi Cutter's testimony. She did not know if the marshal would read it. She did not know if he would care. But if something happened to her, She wanted the record to exist. She sealed the letter, addressed it, and left it in the desk drawer where someone would find it. Then she went upstairs, lay down on the narrow bed, and tried to sleep. She could not. Her mind kept circling back to Levi standing in the freight office with his arms crossed, and that look on his face that said he had made his choice, and nothing she said would change it. She had known him for less than 2 days. She should not trust him. She should not rely on him. But somewhere between the rifle and the handshake and the reckless bid at the rail yard, something had shifted. She did not know what to call it. She just knew it felt like the first solid ground she had stood on in a long time. She left before dawn. The town was silent. The sky was still dark, streaked with pale gray in the east. June saddled her horse behind the newspaper office, tied the saddlebag and the rifle in place, and rode south. The cold bit through her coat. Her breath misted in the air. The road out of Blue Gulch was rutted and icy, and the horse picked its way carefully over the frozen ground. She did not look back. She rode for 3 hours, following the stage road until it split, then taking the smaller fork that led toward the foothills. The Morgan family was staying with relatives on a small ranch near the base of the mountains. It was remote enough to be safe, but not so far out that the land company could not reach them if they tried. June kept her eyes on the horizon. She did not see anyone following, but that did not mean they were not there. She reached the ranch just after noon. The house was low and weathered, tucked into a fold of land with a creek running behind it and a stand of pines to the north. Smoke rose from the chimney. A few chickens scratched in the yard. June dismounted, tied her horse to the rail, and knocked on the door. A man opened the door. He was older, weathered, with gray in his beard and a cautious look in his eyes. June recognized him from the ranch. He had been there the day the Morgans signed the papers. His name was Samuel Morgan. He looked at her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." The house was warm and smelled like coffee and wood smoke. A woman sat at the table near the fire mending a shirt. 2 children played on the floor with wooden blocks. Samuel closed the door and gestured to a chair. June sat. She pulled off her gloves and set the saddlebag on the floor. Samuel poured her a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. "You shouldn't be here. If they followed you, they'll know we talked." June wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I was careful. And I don't have time to wait. The warrant's active. If they catch me before I get your testimony on record, this whole thing dies." Samuel's jaw tightened. "We already told you everything we know. The deed they recorded is not the deed we signed. We gave them grazing rights, not water rights. But we don't have proof. They took the original." June reached into her coat and pulled out the folded copy. "I have this. It's a copy of the recorded deed. If you can swear under oath that you signed something different, I can take it to the marshal." Samuel looked at his wife. She set down the mending and met his eyes. Then she nodded. Samuel turned back to June. "We'll do it. But you need to understand something. If we testify, we lose everything. The land company will come after us. They'll take what little we have left. And they won't stop until we're gone." June's throat tightened. "I know. I'm sorry. But if we don't stop them now, they'll take the whole town. And no one will be safe." Samuel stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. When do we start?" June spent the next 4 hours taking their statements. She wrote everything down: the threats, the poisoned livestock, the broken fences. The night Royce showed up with 2 men and told them they had 72 hours to sell or face consequences. She wrote down the exact terms of the deed they had signed, the clauses about grazing and water, the boundaries they had agreed to. She wrote down the names of the witnesses who had been there the day the papers were signed. When she finished, she read it back to them. Samuel and his wife both signed. June folded the papers carefully and tucked them into her coat lining next to the copied deed. Then she stood. "I'll take this to Laramie tomorrow. If the marshal listens, we have a chance." Samuel walked her to the door. "You be careful. If they catch you on the road, they won't ask questions. They'll just make you disappear." June pulled on her gloves. "I know." She mounted her horse and rode back toward Blue Gulch as the sun dropped low in the west. The sky turned red and gold, then faded to gray. The cold deepened. By the time she reached the edge of town, it was full dark. She kept to the back streets, avoiding the main road. She did not want to run into the sheriff. She did not want to run into Royce. She just wanted to make it back to the newspaper office, lock the door, and wait for Levi to return. But when she turned the corner onto her street, she saw the light. The newspaper office was lit. The door was open, and 2 men stood on the porch. June's pulse spiked. She reined in her horse and backed into the shadow of the nearest building. She could see the men clearly now. One was the sheriff. The other was Royce. They were waiting for her. She did not know how they knew she had left town. She did not know how they knew she would come back tonight. But they were there, and if she rode any closer, they would take her. She turned her horse and rode quietly back the way she had come. Her mind raced. She could not go to the boarding house. She could not go to the hotel. She could not go to anyone in town without putting them at risk. She needed a place to hide, a place they would not think to look. And then she remembered. Levi had said he would be back in 2 days. He had said if she did not show, he would move forward alone. But he had not said where he would be. She turned her horse toward the freight yard. It was dark and empty. The wagon sat silent under the stars. She dismounted, led her horse into the covered shed behind the office, and tied it there. Then she went to the office door and tried the latch. It was unlocked. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her. She sat down on the floor with her back against the wall and tried to steady her breathing. The affidavits were still in her coat. The rifle was still across her shoulder. She was safe for now. But she did not know how long that would last. She did not know when Levi would be back, or if he would be back at all. She closed her eyes and listened to the silence. Hours passed. She did not sleep. She just waited. And then, just before midnight, she heard the sound of a horse outside. She stood, gripped the rifle, and moved to the window. A man dismounted in the yard. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark coat. She recognized the shape of him even in the dark. Levi. She opened the door. He turned, saw her, and crossed the yard in 3 long strides. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "They were waiting for me at the office. I couldn't go back." He looked past her into the freight shed, then back at her face. Did you get the testimony? She nodded. He let out a breath. Good. Then we move tonight. She blinked. Tonight. Where? He stepped inside and closed the door. Laramie. We ride now, we get there by dawn. You hand the affidavits to the marshal before the land company knows you're gone. She stared at him. That's a 40-mile ride in the dark. In winter. He met her eyes. You have a better idea. She did not. She was out of time and out of options. If she stayed in Blue Gulch, the sheriff would find her by morning. If she ran without a plan, she would be a fugitive with no way to clear her name. But if she rode to Laramie tonight with Levi beside her, she had a chance. A small one, but a chance. She straightened. Let's go. They saddled both horses and rode out of Blue Gulch under a sky full of stars. The road to Laramie was rough and frozen, and the cold cut through every layer of clothing. June's hands went numb inside her gloves. Her face burned from the wind. But she kept riding. Levi rode beside her, steady and silent. He did not ask if she was tired. He did not ask if she wanted to stop. He just rode, and she followed. They reached Laramie just as the sky began to lighten in the east. The town was bigger than Blue Gulch, with wider streets and more buildings. The territorial marshal's office sat near the center of town, a stone building with a flag hanging limp in the still air. June dismounted, tied her horse, and pulled the affidavits from her coat. Her hands shook. Levi stood beside her. You want me to come in with you? She shook her head. This is my fight. He nodded. I'll be right here. June walked into the marshal's office. A man sat behind a desk, gray-haired and tired-looking, with a badge pinned to his vest. She set the papers down in front of him. I need to file a complaint against the Blue Gulch Land Company for fraud, coercion, and false warrant. The marshal looked at the papers, then at her. Who are you? June Everly. I run the Blue Gulch newspaper. There's a warrant out for my arrest, but it's false. The land company framed me to shut down my reporting. These are sworn affidavits from the Morgan family proving the company forged a deed and used threats to force a sale. The marshal picked up the papers and read them slowly. When he finished, he looked up. This is serious. If these affidavits are accurate, Judge Holloran signed a fraudulent warrant. June's chest tightened. He did. And the land company is using freight manipulation and intimidation to take over Blue Gulch piece by piece. If you don't act now, they'll own the whole town by spring. The marshal leaned back in his chair. I'll open an investigation, but I need time. I need to verify the affidavits, get statements from the judge, bring in the county clerk. That could take weeks. June's voice shook. I don't have weeks. The sheriff's looking for me right now. If he catches me before you clear the warrant, I'll be in jail and the land company will bury this. The marshal's expression softened. Then you stay here. I'll send a deputy to Blue Gulch to serve notice on the sheriff that the warrant is under review. That'll buy you time. You stay in Laramie until this is settled. June stared at him. I can't stay. I have a newspaper to run. People depending on me. The marshal's jaw tightened. If you go back, you'll be arrested. And once you're in custody, I can't protect you. Stay here. Let me do my job. June wanted to argue. She wanted to fight. But she was so tired. And the look in the marshal's eyes said he was not bluffing. She nodded slowly. How long? He picked up a pen. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. I'll move as fast as I can. June walked out of the office feeling like the ground had shifted under her. She had done what she came to do. She had filed the complaint. She had handed over the evidence. But now she was stuck in Laramie with no way to go home, and no idea if the marshal would follow through. Levi was waiting by the horses. He took one look at her face and frowned. What happened? She told him. He listened without interrupting, then nodded. You did the right thing. Now, we wait. She shook her head. I can't just sit here while the land company tears Blue Gulch apart. He caught her arm gently. If you go back, they'll arrest you. And then everything you just did will be for nothing. She pulled away. So, what do? He thought for a moment. We make noise. We send wires to every newspaper between here and Denver. We tell them what's happening in Blue Gulch. We make it public enough that the land company can't bury it. She stared at him. That'll take money. He shrugged. I have money. And I have contacts. We start today. June felt something break open in her chest. Relief. Gratitude. Something she did not have a name for. She looked at him standing there in the cold morning light, steady and sure, and she realized she was not alone anymore. She had not been alone since the night he walked into her office, and she held a rifle on him, and he did not run. She swallowed hard. Why are you doing this? You could walk away. You could go back to Cheyenne and forget Blue Gulch ever happened. He met her eyes. Because I'm tired of watching good people lose to men with money and no conscience. And because you didn't walk away when it would have been easier. So neither will I. They spent the next 2 days in Laramie. Levi sent wires to newspapers in Denver, Cheyenne, Salt Lake City, and Points East. He paid for the messages out of his own pocket. June wrote the copy. She kept it short and sharp. Blue Gulch under siege by land company using fraud and coercion. Warrant issued to silence newspaper editor. Territorial marshal investigating. She signed it with her name and the name of the Blue Gulch newspaper. Within 48 hours, replies started coming back. 2 papers wanted the full story. 1 wanted an interview. A 4th sent a reporter on the next stage to Laramie. June met with the reporter in the hotel dining room. She told him everything. The Moonstone Ranch. The forged deed. The threats. The auction. Levi's intervention. The affidavits. The reporter took notes, asked questions, and promised to run the story in 3 days. When he left, June sat at the table staring at her cold coffee. She felt hollowed out. She had spent 6 years building the Blue Gulch paper, fighting to be taken seriously, fighting to prove her father wrong. And now she was sitting in a strange town watching someone else tell her story. Levi sat down across from her. You all right? She nodded. I just keep thinking about the people back home, the ones who are still there, the ones who can't leave. If this doesn't work, I've abandoned them. He leaned forward. You didn't abandon anyone. You're doing the only thing that can save them. She looked up. What if it's not enough? He held her gaze. Then, we find another way. But we don't quit. On the 3rd day, the marshal called her back to his office. He had news. The county clerk had confirmed that the recorded deed did not match the deed filed with the original sale documents. The discrepancy was clear. The land company had altered the terms after the Morgans signed. Judge Halloran had been summoned to explain why he issued a warrant based on the fraudulent deed. The investigation was moving forward. The warrant against June was suspended pending resolution. She was free to return to Blue Gulch. June felt the weight lift off her chest. She could go home. She could reopen the paper. She could finish the fight she had started. She thanked the marshal, walked out of the office, and found Levi waiting on the boardwalk. "It's done. The warrant's suspended. I can go home." He smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen from him, and it changed his whole face. "Good. Let's go." They rode back to Blue Gulch in the late afternoon. The town looked the same wooden buildings, the same frozen streets. But something had shifted. The sheriff was not on the porch of the newspaper office. Royce's wagon was gone from the rail yard. The land company had pulled back. Not far. Not permanently. But enough. June unlocked the door to her office, stepped inside, and stood in the silence. The press sat waiting. The type cases lined the walls. The desk was covered in dust. She set down her saddlebag and pulled off her gloves. Levi stood in the doorway. "You need help getting the press running again." She looked at him. "You don't have to stay. You've already done more than anyone had a right to ask." He stepped inside and closed the door. "I know I don't have to. I want to." They worked together for the next 3 days. June set the type for the new edition. Levi hauled in fresh paper from the freight yard. She wrote the story of the investigation, the suspended warrant, the land company's retreat. She did not name Levi in the story, but everyone in Blue Gulch would know. They would see him working in her office. They would see him standing beside her when the paper came out, and they would understand. On the morning of the 4th day, they printed the edition. The press creaked and thumped. The smell of ink filled the room. June pulled the first copy off the press and held it up to the light. The headline read, "Fraud Exposed. Land Company Faces Territorial Investigation." She folded the paper carefully and handed it to Levi. He read it, then looked at her. "You did it." She shook her head. "We did it." He set the paper down on the desk. There was something in his expression she had not seen before. Something that looked like pride. And something that looked like more. He took a step closer. June's breath caught. She did not move. He reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His hand was rough and warm. "I'm not going back to Cheyenne." She stared at him. "What?" He held her gaze. "I'm staying. Blue Gulch needs a freight foreman who's not afraid to push back, and I need a reason to stop running from one job to the next. I think I found one." Her heart hammered. "You can't stay just because of me." He smiled. "I'm not staying just because of you. I'm staying because I want to. Because this is the first place in 10 years that feels like it matters. And because you're here." June's throat tightened. She had spent 6 years believing she was too stubborn, too difficult, too damaged to be worth staying for. Her father had told her that. And she had believed him. But Levi was standing in her office with ink on his hands and snow in his hair, saying he wanted to stay. And she believed him. She stepped closer. If you stay, it's not going to be easy. The land company's not done. They'll come back. They always come back. He did not move. I know. She reached up and rested her hand on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat through the fabric of his shirt. Then stay. He covered her hand with his. I'm not going anywhere. She rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was not tentative. It was not careful. It was the kiss of someone who had been holding back for too long and finally let go. He pulled her closer, his arms strong around her, and she felt something inside her settle, something that had been restless and afraid and alone. She broke the kiss and pressed her forehead against his. I'm scared. He cupped her face in his hands. So am I. But we'll figure it out. She nodded. They stood there in the quiet office, with the press still warm and the smell of ink in the air, and for the first time in 6 years, June Everly felt like she was standing on solid ground. The land company would come back. The fight was not over. But she was not alone anymore, and that made all the difference. 2 weeks later, the territorial marshal issued his final report. The land company was charged with fraud. Judge Halloran was removed from the bench pending investigation. The Moonstone Ranch deed was voided, and the property was returned to the Morgan family. Blue Gulch was safe. Not forever. Not completely. But safe enough. June printed the news on the front page. She sent copies to every paper that had run the story. She sent one to her father. She did not expect a reply. She did not get one. But it did not hurt the way it used to. She had made peace with the fact that some people would never forgive her for being who she was. And she did not need their forgiveness anymore. She had her own. Levi moved into the small room above the freight office. He kept his word. He stayed. He worked the freight lines, kept the shipments moving, and pushed back every time the land company tried to squeeze the town. June kept printing. She kept writing. And she kept fighting. But now, she was not fighting alone. On a cold night in late winter, Levi knocked on the door of the newspaper office after dark. June opened it. He was holding a small wooden box. He set it on the desk and looked at her. I know we've only known each other a few months. I know this is fast. But I'm not a man who waits when I know what I want. And I want you. June stared at the box. He opened it. Inside was a simple gold ring. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. Just a ring that said he meant it. He took her hand. Will you marry me? She did not hesitate. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit. They were married in the spring, in the small church at the edge of Blue Gulch. The Morgans came. The printer came. The widow Calhoun came. Even the blacksmith came, and he never went to weddings. June wore a simple dress the color of cream, with her auburn hair pinned up and a few wildflowers tucked behind her ear. Levi wore a clean shirt and a new coat, and he smiled when she walked down the aisle like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. The preacher spoke about faith and trust and building a life together. June barely heard him. She just looked at Levi and thought about the night she had held a rifle on him, and he had not run. She thought about the auction, the ride to Laramie, the long days working side by side in the newspaper office. She thought about the way he had stayed when everyone else had told her to quit. And she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she had found the one person who would stand with her, no matter what came next. When the preacher said she could kiss her husband, she did. The small crowd clapped. Someone laughed. And June Everly, who had spent 6 years believing she was too broken to be loved, felt whole. They moved into a small house on the edge of town. It was not much. 2 rooms, a fireplace, a narrow porch, but it was theirs. June kept running the newspaper. Levi kept running the freight lines. And together, they kept Blue Gulch alive. The land company did not give up. They tried again the following year, and the year after that. But each time, June printed the truth. And each time, Levi made sure the town had the supplies it needed to hold out. It was not easy. There were lean months. There were fights. There were nights when June lay awake wondering if they were fighting a battle they could not win. But Levi was always there. Steady. Sure. A presence that did not waver. And slowly, Blue Gulch began to grow again. New families moved in. The church expanded. The school added a second room. The land company's grip loosened. Not because they gave up, but because the town learned to push back. And at the center of it all was a newspaper editor and a freight foreman who had built something together that neither of them could have built alone. Years later, June stood in the newspaper office late at night, setting type for the next edition. The press was older now, the wood more worn, but it still ran. Levi came in through the back door, shaking snow off his coat. He hung it on the peg by the door and walked over to where she stood. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. "You coming to bed any time soon?" She leaned back against him, just finishing the front page. He kissed the side of her neck. "You always say that." She smiled. "And I always finish." He turned her around to face him. His hands were rough and warm, the same as they had been the night he walked into her office and she pointed a rifle at him. The same as they had been the day he stayed instead of leaving. The same as they would always be. She looked up at him and saw the same steady gaze that had held hers across a narrow office 7 years ago. And she knew, with a certainty that had only deepened with time, that she had made the right choice. That they had made the right choice. Together, he kissed her, slow and deep, and when he pulled back, he smiled. "Come on. The type will still be there in the morning." She nodded. She set down the type stick, wiped her hands on her apron, and let him lead her upstairs. The press sat quiet in the corner. The town slept outside. And June Everly, who had once believed she was too broken to deserve love, walked upstairs with her husband and felt nothing but gratitude. The final picture came on a spring morning years later. June was standing on the porch of the newspaper office, holding the latest edition in her hands. The headline read, "Blue Gulch celebrates 10 years of growth and independence." The story inside was about the town, the new families, the new businesses, the school that now had 3 rooms and a full-time teacher, the church that had added a bell tower, the freight yard that had expanded to handle twice the volume it had 7 years ago. June had written every word herself. She had printed every copy herself, and she had done it all knowing that the fight was never really over, but that the town had learned to stand. Levi walked up the steps and stood beside her. He read the headline over her shoulder, then smiled. You did good. She shook her head. We did good. He put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. She leaned into him and looked out at the street. Blue Gulch was not perfect. It was still a small town on the edge of the frontier, still vulnerable to men with money and bad intentions. But it was alive, and it was theirs. June folded the paper carefully and tucked it under her arm. Then she turned and kissed her husband. The sun was warm on her face. The air smelled like pine and spring rain. And for the first time in her life, June Everly felt like she had everything she needed. She had held a gun on the wrong man and lost everything in one night. But in losing everything, she had found something she had never expected. She had found a partner, a friend, a love that did not ask her to be smaller or quieter or easier. She had found a man who stayed when staying was hard, and she had found herself, the woman her father said she could never be, the woman who fought and won and built a life worth living. June Everly smiled. She took her husband's hand, and together they walked back inside to start another day.